Hello, everyone. Welcome to AstroPath. Jennie and Laurie talking today about Scorpio season. So before we dive into this conversation about Scorpio season, I want to just say Jennie of Hidden Path Astrology, go find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. Find me at astrolore.org. We're on most of your social media sites. Please find us and follow us. Subscribe to our channel and leave us little notes. We love to hear from you. And aside from that, let's dive into talking about Scorpio season. When does it start? When does it end?
That's right. It starts October 23rd, ends November 22nd. That's what's happening. And it is, all Scorpio all the time.
It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. For those of you listening, Jennie and I, we always meet a little bit and talk about this stuff a little bit before we start the recording. And it's a very interesting period of time. We start in one place and end in a very different place. And there's a lot of interesting dynamics along the way. And given that this does encompass the period of time here in the United States where we've got the election and there's a lot going on. It's going to definitely be an interesting path to follow and pay attention to.
That's right. Because not only is it Scorpio season, which we'll get more into, but we also have a lot of other things. We've got a couple of eclipses. We've got Mars turning retrograde during this month. And we also just have, there's just so much Scorpio energy that's going on. And as Laurie mentioned, there is some challenges in the beginning of the month for sure, and leading up into those eclipses. And then the tone kind of changes. Really, it's about November 12th is when it really starts to settle down and look a little bit different. So that's kind of what we're going to cover. But I guess we should start by talking more about Scorpio, huh?
Yeah, we can start by talking more about Scorpio because that is, this is the point in time when the sun moves into that deep, intense sign. It's so interesting. I always think of the seasons, when the sun moves into a sign that it brings light and warmth. But, how much light and warmth is there this time of year?
Yeah, it is Scorpio after all. Yeah, Scorpio is, I think, is the deepest, most hidden, kind of emotional, mysterious things altogether. Like it's a lot of things that are tucked away. And it's not very easy material to grapple with. And by definition, there's always going to be some unconsciousness involved with the archetype of Scorpio, just because we can't know every single emotion. Our limbic brains that hold our emotional nature is ancient, and there's so much in it that there's only so much that we can bring up and kind of look at. So right out of the gate, you've got to think in terms of working with some difficult things, but also just being willing to let go of some of the difficulty, because you can't do it all. We're not equipped in our lifetimes to do all of that deep work. So it's sort of like being willing to do some of the deep work and work with that, and then just be okay with just not knowing. And that's a challenging thing, right? In our society, it's like we don't like that.
It really is, and to think about Scorpio as, it's funny because Scorpio has such a bad reputation. And I think I don't want to build on that bad reputation, because Scorpio is really a powerful, intense, and beautiful sign. There's a lot in it of great value. What is hidden under those deep rocks in the bottom of the well is important to pay attention to and to try to seek out, even if we can't get all the way into it. But, Scorpio is a fixed water sign. So it is water, it is deep, deep emotion, and it is fixed. It does not, it doesn't flow easily. Like I think you're the one that started talking to me a lot about Scorpio as being the well, right? Yeah, it's
like the water down in the cavern. But also just having the understanding, I like your thing about the well, because I also think about Scorpio as being the groundwater. It's the water that sustains these whole cities, but you don't see it. You don't know where it is. And so it kind of has this this powerful thing to it as well. Like it's this underlying power. But the other thing I was thinking about in terms of psychology, Scorpios often refers to the things that as we grow up, we recognize that there are things that people don't want us to show. So we kind of hide those things and we tuck them away and we stuff them down. And we kind of lose some of our power by doing that, but it's a normal process. But we do it because we're afraid of being rejected. So we hide the stuff because we're afraid of being rejected. And then as you become an adult, you have to kind of unpack some of those things and bring that out and reclaim them. So there's a very regenerative power to Scorpio. And I think that's one of the most wonderful things about it, is regenerating these parts of you that maybe you thought were dead, or you thought you kind of had to kill off.
Right. And understanding that, by regenerating them, by bringing them to the surface to some extent, that's where you really find your power.
Yeah.
The whole idea of, Scorpio, on the one hand, it's all just destructive, painful, dark, deep stuff. And on the other hand, it is the empowerment that comes out of going into those deep places and doing the work necessary. And, that's like, you think about the different things that symbolize Scorpio. You think of, people often talk about the scorpion that's going to sting you. And I don't know where the good side of the scorpion is, but there's the phoenix that has to go deep into those dark places in order to come out with that regeneration of the mythical creature.
Yeah. I mean, it really does wrangle with the transformative powers. I mean, that's really what Scorpio is getting at. And also, in modern times, the astrologers have associated Pluto with Scorpio. So there's a Plutonic component to it that gets tied in with those same meanings. But also the ancient astrologers use Mars as the ruler of Scorpio. And that does help understand maybe some of the Scorpio parts of the scorpion itself, like that it kind of shows up, suited up for battle. It kind of has this armor on it, and that's sort of what it exhibits. But it's quiet and it's hidden underneath things, so it has this really tucked away quality to it.
So it's really good, as you start thinking about this, and we'll talk more about this when we get into the individual impacts, but right off out of the gate here, just to really, if you know your chart, pay attention. Where is Scorpio in your chart? What house does Scorpio hold? If you're using whole sign house systems, it's going to be very easy to just identify what house it's in. That is the area of your life that is always calling for this level of regeneration.
Yeah. And just trying to think, anything else I was going to add about Scorpio is just bearing in mind, it is a fixed water sign. You've already mentioned that. But it does have this steadfast and loyal quality to it. Like if you earn the loyalty of Scorpio as a fixed sign, it will stay by you, and it will do what is necessary to help defend, protect, and be part of that. So it has that piece to it too. And as water, it really is, you might think of Scorpio as being not very emotional, or you might think of it as being very emotional. I don't know, but all of that is because there's a great sensitivity and it has a profound connection to emotional content. So it either needs to protect it and like try to keep it back, or you see it coming out in that,
right.
So it kind of has in and out quality.
You're not going to see it coming out in the way most people might consider sensitivity to come out.
Right.
Right. It's not going to come out with, oh, poor me, I'm going to cry about something. It's going to come out with a
zinger.
With a zinger. Yeah. That's the emotion of Scorpio. Very different than Cancer or Pisces emotion.
Yeah. So this Scorpio season, we're going to have an opportunity to wrangle with these energies. That's what the Scorpio season is always going to bring to our attention. Every season will be a bit different, and this one certainly is, but this is your opportunity to work with that harder emotional content. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, especially when we look at your rising sign, right? Scorpio lands.
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention here right away also is that the new moon, which is an eclipse as well, happens just a few days after the season begins. And we're not going to talk a whole lot about it today. We
Mhm.
mention it in passing, but we will be doing a separate video for the new moon eclipse. So hang on to all your questions and thoughts about that and listen to the video that we do about that.
Yeah. So I guess we should talk a little bit more about what the shape of the month before we launch into the personal stuff. So
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
to say before Scorpio season starts, right before, like the earlier in the day of the 23rd, Saturn goes direct in Aquarius and Venus enters Scorpio right before the sun does. So, we talked, I think last month, a lot of the planets were in air signs. We were all about air, right? We were all in our intellect. And what changes now?
Yeah, we get dropped,
We
boom,
get
into the
dropped.
emotional realm like that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty quick. I mean, we had a
Yeah.
couple precursors in Libra season. We had Pluto doing some things to the squaring
Yes.
Sun and Venus, which helped maybe prepare us a little bit, but we probably just wanted to ignore it a little bit. I don't know if you're successful, because now once we hit October 23rd, we really get into the watery realms. And after that solar eclipse, on October 25th, not long after that, we have Mercury moving to Scorpio and we have Jupiter retrograding back into Pisces. So that just suddenly puts us in this place where now we have all these planets in water signs where we were just in air.
Yeah.
So it might be a little bit of like, oh gosh, like what's happening? I'm suddenly in this like emotional place. Well, this is what's happening and what's being highlighted.
It's so interesting. I remember us talking last time just about the intellectual need to communicate. So this dropping into the emotion at right after that is so interesting. It's like all this communication that hopefully happened is now dropping you into a place where on an emotional level, you get to deal with what you've been intellectualizing about.
Yeah, and one of the things that might happen is that suddenly you may find yourself unable to get the perspective you just had.
Right.
Like
Oh,
where
good
before you
point.
had this clear perspective, and now suddenly Venus is in Scorpio too, and your ability to connect and communicate with people has just completely changed out of the intellectual realm and conversation and ideas, and now it's just gone into the emotions.
Yeah.
So you really are, in a way, left with no choice but to kind of understand your own emotions, to have a moment with yourself and your own emotions before you attempt to connect. Because the irony here is that Mars, that rules Scorpio, is still in Gemini. So it wants to have these conversations, but suddenly the context has changed and the backdrop of you're kind of in this quagmire of emotions instead of this clear intellectual place. It's a very different vibe.
Yeah. And just at that point on October 30th, Mars in Gemini goes retrograde. So we are rethinking how we have been pushing forward with that communication. All of a sudden, that pushing forward comes to, we kind of hit a wall. We hit a wall and drop into emotion. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so there really is this very inward focus between the eclipse, which focuses us on endings, between the Mars retrograde, and just between the Scorpio itself. There really is this invitation, or perhaps it's a demand, that you're going to have to work with what is coming up for you. Like how do you deal with your emotions? What relationship do you have with your emotions? These are some of the questions you're going to need to ask. And is there a way that you can, as a human being, pause and give yourself a moment before you launch into things? Because it's a highly volatile, emotional month, at least for the first little bit more than half. It's very, very much in that realm.
Yeah, you can't trust your intellect. You got to go in and feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's no hiding. There's no room for bullshit this month. Like there's just not going to be, it's going to backfire if you are in a bullshit mode. So, but then just to kind of keep, there's definitely some challenges after that quarter moon. You have Venus tangling with the Uranus-Saturn square. That's the signature of the last couple of years of this face off and tensions between old structures and this desire for a new way of doing things. So Venus grapples with that. So you might see some of those issues reflected in your relationships. and it might be fairly triggering
Yeah,
depending on what you have in your own chart.
it's fascinating. That period of time between November 1st and November 11th or 12th, there's, Venus grapples with that Uranus Saturn, the sun grapples with that Uranus Saturn, Mercury, they're all in that thing. And that's when we have our election. So big surprise, really. I mean, it's just, that's the thing about mundane astrology. It just reflects what's going on.
Yeah. And we're reflecting our stories onto our ancient stories into modern times through astrology. So just November 8th is the lunar eclipse. Eclipses always comes in pairs. So this is the second eclipse of the pair. And we will talk about that full moon eclipse even in the new moon thing a bit.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to say about all that grappling with the Saturn Uranus is, no matter how you feel about any of it, go vote. Damn it. Just go vote.
Yeah.
Don't let this overwhelm about what's going on in the culture make you feel like it's not worth it, or whatever conversations people have. Just get out and vote.
Yeah. And just, it's always interesting to me to think about, what if everybody did vote? So just think about that for a moment while we're doing this video.
Right.
This is an interesting thought, but so basically those kind of entanglements continue until we have the sun squaring Saturn. So that only happens twice a year. So November 11th, we have that sun Saturn square, which we talked a little bit about that. Sometimes I think about Saturn as kind of blocking that light, but I don't know. I think there could be some support available. I mean, squares are always difficult, but with the Saturn in Aquarius up against that Scorpio sun, it's kind of like that balance between deep emotional stuff and then where do you want to see things going? Like, what's your view?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jenny, that Saturn squaring the sun is always difficult. It always requires some effort. And I think you're right, because of the intense depth of Scorpio and the fact that Saturn is in Aquarius, it might really just allow us in that period of time to use our intellect to uplift that depth of emotion and help us not get so stuck in it.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, do the emotional stuff as you have to, but recognize where you're at and then think about what is your higher view. I mean, Aquarius is the humanitarian sign too.
Right.
So it's, what do you want to see and how do your own emotions reflect into that or play into that whole scenario?
Yeah. Then the good news is that after the 12th, we've got a lot of much more positive energies coming up. These planets that are all kind of traveling together, the Venus, Mercury, and Sun, are all in a positive trine relationship with Neptune and with Jupiter, and a sextile to Pluto. So there's a lot of possibilities and kind of a free flow of energy that comes in at that point. And then on the 16th, with Venus entering Sagittarius, the 17th, Mercury entering Sagittarius, that uplifts it more and pulls it out of that deep emotion into a different kind of more expressive energy.
Yeah, we'll be perhaps opinionated and so on, but also adventurous and willing to explore other viewpoints and willing to kind of take it on board instead of just being really tied into your own, your perhaps triggering emotions. That's a really nice, I like the way that the month kind of ends. Like, again, it's November 12th on until the 22nd when the season ends. There's a lot of just a free flow of energy there. I know you like to refer to trines as gifts, which I think is great. We have, Jupiter in Pisces at that point, trining all three of those things. Venus, Mercury, and Sun.
That's lovely.
Expansive.
That's very lovely.
It's an expansive. I think of it as kind of, I don't know, just being flush with nourishment. It's like refreshing. I mean, it's still all water, so we're still like hydrating. And encouraging things to grow. But there's an access to structure through the sextile to Pluto. So
maybe a sense of relief or a sense of, I was going to say escape, but
Or surrender,
surrender.
like kind
Yeah.
of having to go,
Yeah.
okay, this is where we're at. This is what's
Right.
happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's good. That's good. Bringing in the idea of surrender too.
Mhm.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
What about that Mars square Neptune? Let's just mention that, Jenny.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's on November 19th. So we're at the very end of the month and we have this Mars. So we're going to remember Mars is in Gemini and it's retrograde at this point. So this is sort of this internal thinking that's happening. This inner Mars doesn't really like to be retrograde because it's a forward moving planet and it's like it's a trigger planet that activates other things, and so it's not a willing participant in being retrograde, and then squaring Neptune too, it sort of submerges it. So on a negative level, it might feel really frustrating and like, oh, but I want these other things. But I think back to that keyword of surrender, you're just going to have to surrender to that and see what gifts actually are in that. It's growth around what do you want the bigger picture to be? Like, can you find a stronger sense of empathy for other people? Can you?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know, just seeing us all in this one place, whether we like it or not. And that's the square part, where we may not like it, but it is where we are. We all live on one planet. We are all here in this place. And it kind of brings in those loftier ideals and viewpoints.
Yeah. And a square demands some action, and the action with this very well may be around surrender, or go write some music about it, or write some poetry.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. But because it is while Mars is retrograde, there's a 3-part story. And I just want to say that the first pass of this was October 12th, this one on the 19th of November, and then the final one will be in March of next year. If you have planets very close to 22 degrees of the mutable signs, this is going to be really relevant to you. How you use your forward moving, how you use that energy is very, very significant.
Yeah. And one final note for the month, on the 20th, you have the Sun trine Jupiter. And that is considered to be one of the most beneficial aspects. So that is a really nice positive note. And again, that's something that only happens, it's only going to happen a couple times a year. So that is a really nice aspect to have, just to kind of bring in those more expansive qualities and just, I don't know, be at peace with the water. I mean, part of the struggle with our water seasons is just that our society doesn't want us to get really into those emotions. And it's part of what we need to do as human beings. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end. And now if you hang around, we're going to be talking about the individual impacts. So I'm going to. Okay. So now we are moving into the personal impact part of our programming today. And we're going to start out, we're going to look at those of you who have Aries rising. Now, if you've got Aries rising, you can see that the sun, when it enters Scorpio, is moving right into this area of your chart, which is the 8th house. So this brings that whole idea of where you need to go deep, where there is a focus, and really pulling you into deep emotional places. And this is the 8th house, which is the deepest house. If you've got Aries rising, you've got a real deep connection with this area that is, the most challenging house, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What do you want to say about that 8th house?
This is the place of shared resources. So I always think that this is the place where, you get together and the relationship's going great, And then you hit this point where now you've gone deeper and your baggage starts bumping into the baggage of the other person.
Yeah.
So this is that area of life where you can't just stay superficial. You must get into the deeper stuff. And that's what's happening here. And that's what Scorpio season is going to bring up for you.
Right. So, one of the interesting things is how the month is kind of like you talked about. The month is really broken down into kind of three parts. So not the month, the season, the Scorpio season. So this first period of time between the 23rd and about the second.
Yeah, I mean, November 5th is when it really switches.
Okay.
So somewhere in there.
So that first period of time, that first part of the season is really just about going deep and really going deep in your trying to understand how you're grappling with those intense, deep things that you encounter when you're dealing with other people.
Yeah.
And then the next piece of the programming of Scorpio season, you have to really grapple with the intensity that comes up as all those planets that are now in Scorpio start squaring Saturn in Uranus. So this brings in some conflict from the community or some effort that you need to put in, something you're learning from the community that is teaching you or helping you understand how to grapple with those deep, intense things that you're dealing with other people.
Yeah, I mean, this is where your community, as challenging and annoying and frustrating as it might be, can provide a source of upliftment, can show you the way of like, hey, this is where you need to do the work in order to contribute to the community. And so this could be your like group of friends. That is a bigger group. This could be a group you're dealing with at work. This could be literally a community forum you're attending. Like maybe you're helping out with the polls, or something like that. But that's where the lessons are coming from. There's a stress being put on you. And so you're like getting annoyed about other people's stuff. And you know what? If you are, you're right on schedule.
Exactly.
So all you really need to do is take a breath, take a step back. If you have this knowledge, you can remind yourself, oh gosh, this is what we're talking about in this video.
And allow your community to support you and give you a different perspective on that depth that you're having to deal with, because the community can show you kind of an intellectual way to work with it.
Yeah. And one of the things you're probably learning is boundaries. How do you set the boundaries? Because that's what you're going to be doing. Like, how do you set the boundaries to give yourself some space to cope? But also once you've given yourself space, you're going to need to grapple with the external reality of whatever's happening in that community. So it's both together, but fortunately you're going to get some support, right, Laurie?
Yeah. The last third of the month, Jupiter will have moved into Pisces. So we'll have both Jupiter and Neptune trining that sun. So, you've kind of gone through this thing where you go into this deep area of having to deal with other people's baggage, and then you're learning something through the community that is allowing you to work with it, but it's hard work. And then at the last third, there's just an opening in your unconscious that allows you to surrender into that deep space as you grapple with your boundaries with other people.
Yeah, at the risk of using a cliche word, I just think this could be some form of spirituality, your connection to your higher self, your connection to what you view the collective as. I mean, it depends on what your viewpoint is on those things, but nonetheless, it's something that is much larger than just the self. And that can provide an enormous amount of support for you. Like, in this space.
It could be a real understanding of the suffering of others that allows you to kind of surrender to your own difficulty in grappling with that baggage of someone else's.
Yeah. And I mean, it might be just simply that you realize the way that you block your own path, because this is the place where you are, you kind of create your own undoing. So this is a viewpoint of like, oh, look at how I do that. And I don't necessarily need to do that because I can see that. I can see how that's happening. So it really brings in a nice support. towards the end of the month.
Yeah, towards the end of the month. So the month definitely ends on a much better note. And
Yes.
that's good news. Okay. So now for those of you who have Taurus rising, let's take a look at this. This at the beginning of the month, how we're looking at these is we're looking at and I keep saying month, but I mean the Scorpio season from the 23rd of October to the 22nd of November. If you break that into thirds, basically the first third, we're going to be just falling into deep emotional spaces. And for you with Taurus rising, this is going to be very much a part of what's going on in your intimate partnerships, super close friends, one-on-one relationships is the area that's being lit up with this emotional depth and intensity.
Yes, this is a place where, yeah, your intense emotions will be coming to the surface in this area of your life.
Yeah.
So you may be contending with some very challenging things in this area, and that's something to note. But the question really is about having the relationship with yourself. So going in to have a better understanding of your own emotions. That's what's kind of being asked in the earlier part of the month, that you have to go into this kind of internal understanding. And if you try to ignore that and just go into the external world, it's going to probably backfire in different ways. So it's just something about just surrendering to that a little bit, that you have to do this inner stuff.
Yeah. You've been going along, being all intellectual, and then Scorpio season starts. It's time to go inward and really grappling with your own understanding of emotional connection with others.
Yeah.
As well.
And then we're going to move into that middle third,
Yeah,
right? Where this is where the middle third is the most challenging chunk of the season. And this is where something external is more likely to come and kind of fly at your face. And in your case with Taurus rising, it's going to be something to do with your profession or how you show up in public, how you show up in the public eye, your social reputation, but also that there is a great deal to learn from that part of your life. So rather than resisting, this is a time to go, okay, what do I need to look at here? What do I need to work with? What's the conflict? And look at your place in that conflict, and then look at just what you need to learn. Resistance creates more suffering than growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So open to it,
And yeah, that square, it demands that you take responsibility for what you're learning in the public that is supporting your ability to go deep in your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's really what the middle part of the Scorpio season is. You're grappling with that area. Mm-hmm. And then are we ready to go on to the best part?
I think so.
All right. The third part of the season is going to see Jupiter having moved into Pisces. So we've got both Neptune and Jupiter here in Pisces, forming a lovely trine aspect to the sun. So this brings, this really highlights your community and how your community supports your ability to deeply connect with individuals in your seventh house.
Mm-hmm. So when we say community, I mean, it means different things. It can mean your group of friends. This isn't the intimate one-on-one connection with friends, but this is the friends as a larger group, like who you sort of think about, and how much they can support you in your partnership, in your partnerships that might be the subject of a lot of emotional scrutiny for you this month. So really it's taking it back and letting those things just uplift you. And in Pisces, it's this uplifting, it's this holding you into this more idealistic kind of rosy place.
Yeah.
Can be very helpful.
Yeah. If you're very disturbed by what happens at the elections on the 8th, your community will support you.
That's
right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The community is really in that last section of the season, really is there to support your desires in relationships with others, in the ability to go deep in relationships with others.
Yeah, and also whatever the ideals are of whatever community you're part of, like what are those ideals? Because that's what Pisces helps kind of usher in. And it's nice, with
Yeah.
Taurus rising, it's in that group space. So you really get to share those ideals, in that way. Your thoughts about humanitarian causes can really come into in a tangible way in the group settings.
Ah,
So enjoy
lovely.
that. Hope that
Okay.
helps you out.
Yeah, enjoy that last part of the season. Surrender to the first part, do the work in the second part, and then really just open your heart to the ability of the community to help support you. So there's that. Now we're going to move on to those of you with Gemini rising. Now, if you have Gemini rising, the Scorpio season itself brings the sun and Venus and Mercury into your 6th house. So, wherever Scorpio is a place of deep importance. It's, in the 6th house is very much about how we care for ourselves, how we care for our bodies, how we support the function of our lives through how we manage our day-to-day routines.
Mhm. So in a lot of ways, this is where you might have some intense feelings about how you, about your health, and so you're doing these activities to keep your health, and it might be physical health, but it could also have an impact on mental health. So you might have some really intense feelings about how that all plays out, or maybe even have some attachments to whatever your workout routines are. So that is something to contemplate and work with in the first, especially the first third of Scorpio season, where we really have this powerful internal focus
Yeah.
of having to kind of, I always just think about having a relationship to yourself. And that is not something we grow up learning, but it's something that's very important that you work with that. So that's what you're going to get the opportunity to
Yeah.
do
And
early on in the
to
season.
your physical self with that in the 6th house, it's really is so much about your relationship to your physicality, how you, well, it also it brings in, yeah, spiritual practices as well, but I think of the 6th house more in terms of the dietary ways we take care of ourselves, the
Mhm.
exercise routines, our pets. Our pets are the 6th house as well.
Yeah.
Any of these things that are really a part of our day-to-day routine. So, it could be a time when you really have to go deep and think about how you're caring for your body.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's a Mars ruled place. So it's a place of action, is
Right.
what you need. So I agree with you, Laurie, about the
Yeah.
physicality of it. Really,
Yeah.
really contends with that.
Yeah.
And that, so the middle third of the month is where we see the greatest challenges, where we have Saturn that we have depicted here, and also the planet Uranus putting a lot of stress on the
Right.
Scorpio area. So in this case, you're being challenged to open your mind, because Saturn is where you take responsibility. And in Aquarius, we're looking at humanitarian viewpoints, a way that you can get perspective from high up above. So you're being challenged to open your mind beyond perhaps what comes easily to you. There's a lot of lessons here. Saturn's always teaching us lessons, and with a square, there's a demand for growth. So what ways do you need to allow that challenge to uplift you and lift you out of the emotional space?
Yeah, and allow your worldview to have its say in how you care for your body.
Mm.
Really thinking about that, what does your world, what have you been learning for the last couple of years? Saturn's been moving through your 9th house if you've got Gemini rising. So you've been learning a lot about what you're, taking responsibility for your own worldview. Rather than, oh, I just think the way my mother taught me or my husband thinks. This is a time when you've really been taking responsibility for how your education, your understanding of the greater world, and how does that understanding, what is that understanding teaching you about how you care for yourself?
Yeah, and I like how you're saying that. And I mean, the only thing I would add is just that it kind of brings in this innovative, inventive flair. It kind of gives you the possibility to harness that Aquarius energy and, tweak and twist and be inventive in how you do your practices for this, especially for the Scorpio season.
Yes. Okay. And then, so that covers like the first third of the season. The second third of the season is the struggling part. And then the last part of this Scorpio season, Jupiter will have moved in and kind of joined with Neptune here back in Pisces. And those two planets are going to be trining that sun. So this really gives some relief toward the end of the month, an expansive sense of, just the ability to do what you're trying to do in the first part. This really encourages an expansion of that.
Yes, this is kind of like if you have a profession, which many of you probably do, this is how that part really supports you and helps you sort of get the fruits of your labors of those practices you do in the sixth house. So they work really well together here. This is how and the sixth house can also be your work routines too. So there's a really nice flow here where that work you're doing is paying off and it's showing up and people can see it. And because of that, you're able to really step into roles in your workplace or how you show up in the public eye in a really lovely way. It's a nice support.
Yeah, that's really lovely. So the good news here with Scorpio season is that we really do end on a positive note just before all the planets start zipping right into Sagittarius, which will change things again. And we'll get there when we get there, right? Okay, so that ends Gemini. Let's move on to those of you who have Cancer rising, and this brings our attention here for Scorpio season. It brings our attention to the fifth house, which is where the sun will move. Mercury and Venus as well will be in this area. So there's a lot of depth that we have to explore in the fifth house being really the area where we give of ourselves. People used to talk about the fifth house as children, love affairs, creativity. It's where we give of ourselves most unconditionally, where we give love. So those of you who have Cancer rising, give of yourselves in a very deep way. And this really brings the energy there.
Yeah, so I mean, we're really looking at the first part of Scorpio season as just very internally focused, where you're having to really look at your emotions and your emotional content and the depth of that content and kind of work with it with yourself in your own quiet behind the scenes kind of way. So that's what during the Scorpio season, you're really going to be looking at your creative projects. But it also means that some of that deep, difficult emotional content is going to show up in your creative projects. So it's kind of a two-way street, and the degree to which you can face it and bring some level of consciousness to it is going to be the degree to which you can employ that intense power into your creative pursuits versus it just popping up, erupting out of any of these places where you're taking risks or doing your creative stuff. So
it's always interesting to me. People who have Cancer rising have such an interesting depth to their creative work. You always see that. I don't know if you know anyone with Cancer rising.
No.
At any rate, the second third of this Scorpio season brings in the biggest challenges, and that challenge is really coming from the eighth house, other people's values, other people's baggage, as I like to think about it.
Yeah, this really raises the challenge of what kind of boundaries do you need to set in order to do your creative pursuits? Are those boundaries just boundaries or are they walls? And like modulating what that is. And really using, I know we talk about this a lot as the eighth house as kind of ritual, but using ritual is very appropriate for this sort of thing to help you stay the course, to help you keep putting the time you need to put into either your creative pursuits or the way that you give love. I mean, there's really this nice interplay between giving of love, but having to have some boundaries. Like, you can't just walk around the world with your heart on your sleeve all the time. It's not possible. It's too much. So this allows you to kind of, regulate it. And that's what some of the lesson here is of Saturn. It's not an easy task, but it's a helpful and useful one.
It's interesting to think, people with Cancer rising have had Saturn moving through that 8th house for a couple of years now, really taking responsibility and being accountable for how they grapple with other people's values and baggage. And now at this time, with this square to the sun, really using that understanding to do what you need to do to go into these deep places of giving of yourself.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then the last third of the month, we move into this more of a free flow of energy.
Jupiter will have moved into Pisces, backed into
right.
Pisces because it's retrograde. And then those two will be trining the sun. Okay.
Yeah. So that just brings in this whole other piece of your worldview, your ability to think critically, and that really supports you nicely in how you do whatever this creative project or giving of love is that you're doing. It's really nice because when you're in that intense Scorpio place and you might be struggling with some different emotional issues, if you can reach out to, opening your mind to the way that perhaps different levels of higher education have supported you in the past, and reach to that knowledge that you have and that wisdom that you have, it is just really going to help you ease some of that, angst, the angsty stuff that's going on with the Scorpio there.
And it's just lovely that I kind of, I know retrogrades are supposed to be thought of negatively and all that, but I really like the idea of Jupiter coming back to help support Neptune's work. And, Jupiter's been plowing into your 10th house, career, expand my career. And then it's like, wait a minute, you've got to go back and do a little bit more of, understanding your worldview and allowing that to support your creativity before Jupiter will turn back around and you'll get back on board with that movement forward.
Yeah. So this is kind of what the month ahead looks like, and tap into that support that you have up there. It's available to you.
Yeah.
Especially towards the end of the month.
Yeah. The end of the month, we end on a much higher note. So that's a great thing. Okay. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Leo rising, and this is going to bring the sun into your 4th house. So those of you with Leo rising have a very deep, intense connection with home and family. And this is really highlighting that. It's kind of moving you into the depth of that feeling around home and family.
Yeah, so this is where your most turbulent emotional content that's usually keep hidden from view is going to be popping up around family stuff. So this can be your family of origin, as in your parents and so on, but also can be lineage. So things beyond just the parents, or it also could just be simply your home life right now.
Right.
Whatever your living situation is. Your roommates.
Could be your roommates, or the fact that the porch is falling down on your house. It could be the actual structure of the home, or it can be the people in the home or the people in your lineage.
Yeah. So some way that this emotional stuff coming to the surface for you. And again, the 4th house is very private. So again, this is another time when, even though you have Leo rising, this is tucked away, kind of hidden from view a little bit in the privacy of your home. So, exactly, not even so to speak, but exactly what it means.
Right. So this is a time of really going deep there. And then the second third, that first third of the month, that's what you're really focusing on, is going deep in that area. The second third of the month, you are facing the most difficult part of the month, which is probably going to be reflected through your personal relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where the challenge is coming from here. But it's also, Saturn is always the thing that asks us to grow. It's
Yeah.
always the teacher, more than any other planet. So it really is asking you to, where do you need to grow? Like maybe there's some remnant emotional detritus, that you really need to kind of grow up, because we all need to parent ourselves to some degree. And maybe whatever's happening in your partnership, whether that's a one-on-one close friendship or actual intimate relationship or something else, it's a way that you're being asked to grow, and step up and go, hey, you know what, this part of you is kind of unconscious, and it needs to kind of step into the light a little bit more. And this is never easy work. This is always like, oh God, I have to look at my stuff, and oh boy, like, thought I had figured that out, and I haven't. So that's kind of what's being asked.
Yeah. And with these two both in, the cardinal signs, or the angular houses rather, this is really powerful. This is a powerful statement for those of you with Leo rising. Saturn's been moving through that seventh house, and you've been really learning a lot about your partnerships. And here, you're being asked to grow in your understanding of your family. This partnership is a reflection. You're getting the mirror impact from your partnerships here. So accept it, go deep, do the work necessary.
And for the last third of the month, you kind of get this built-in support system a little bit, or you get a chance after the intensity of that middle chunk of the month, and we move into the last third. You get this trine as Jupiter moves into Pisces, and Neptune's already there. So you're going to get that trining, not just the sun, but the other planets in Scorpio that will be in your fourth house. So this is something, your ability to deal with the intense stuff of other people, like you have this ability, can support you in how you are dealing with your family. Maybe this is something you learn from watching other people as they go through their stuff, and you just are able to be compassionate and understanding.
I think
and it supports you in doing it for yourself, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. And I think it's so important to use that word compassion here, because it is really this ability that you've learned of understanding, being compassionate about the baggage that other people carry in that eighth house. And that compassion that you have learned is really supporting the depth in the home and family. Your depth of understanding the people you live with, or why the porch is falling in. Or, Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just a really good, I mean, the word compassion too is, it's not passive. Compassion is something active that you have to activate. So it's empathy, but it's also it employs your mental capacities to really, to learn, to grow, to step back, and to be able to see what's going on for other people. And,
to take your own experience and reflect it out again, and understand that, we all suffer. And once we've suffered, if we can just turn that and understand that it's a common thing with everyone. And so for you, really understanding suffering and compassion is going to really help you go into those deep places with your family.
Yeah, and probably for you, it might be easier to have compassion for other people than it is for yourself. I mean, usually that's the case, but especially with Leo rising, and that being the Scorpio being in the fourth house, self-acceptance is a challenge, and this kind of gives you a template for how to do that.
Right.
So it's pretty cool.
Beautiful. So bottom line, the ending of the month is the best part. We start out, we go deep, we go into this struggle space from the relationship, and then we really have this flow of understanding that comes at the end of the month. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Virgo rising. If it will let me do it. Why is it not? Okay. Those of you with Virgo rising, this brings the sun and the other planets that are going to be in Scorpio into your third house. So here's the sun here in the third house. So you got to go really deep in your communications, in
Yeah.
your interactions with people in your day-to-day life. You don't want to take your new neighbor that just moved in downstairs and you know, you don't want to take that too lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
I
an
think,
intensity in that.
yeah, I mean, this is kind of an interesting configuration because it's just thinking about, you might just be having a casual conversation, but what you're maybe not taking on board is what is the deeper emotional content beneath that casual conversation. And you may not have noticed how you're feeling that particular day, or maybe you're poignantly aware of how you're feeling that day and you're trying to have a casual conversation. So this, I think it's interesting because it really brings this depth to this kind of more, I don't know, this area that we think of as, in a way, as being kind of superficial in some lights, just because it contends with acquaintanceships and stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, our siblings live in the third house too.
Right.
So
And
there's
we
some
know
intense
that
issues.
those relationships can be incredibly intense. And
Yeah.
for any of you listening who've had a nightmare neighbor situation, you know that those relationships, even of our neighbors, aren't always just superficial.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So the first third of the month, we're really looking at how internal you have to get. And this is looking within, looking at your emotional content, you know, and that once we get into kind of the second third of the month, that's when the major or the most challenging portions of the month are occurring. I mean, there's still some challenges in the beginning, but that middle part is really kind of thick with challenge. And in this case, it's something to do with what you need to learn about something that's in your immediate environment, your practices that you do, your possibly your pets.
Right.
That
Right.
are maybe they're challenging you in some way.
Or your new neighbor that moved in downstairs is horrified by the racket of your animal running around the apartment.
Yeah, so Saturn always brings in a lesson. And so in this case, this lesson is about what do you need to do for your health? What kind of practices you need to look at? Maybe it's how you eat. Are you getting enough exercise? These are the kind of things you want to look at that really help support a more elevated mindset that Aquarius kind of represents.
Right.
And how is that presenting some challenge to you in your immediate environment? If you're not taking care of your health, let's say, it could affect your mobility, your ability to walk and navigate your third house, which is the immediate environment. So there's a number of different ways this could play out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that second part, that second third of this Scorpio season, you're going to really want to think about how those two work together and do your best to just settle into that depth and allow your day-to-day routines to help you do that. Even if it does take a great deal of effort. And then in that last third of the month, Jupiter will have moved into Pisces, coming back into the sign where Neptune is still moving through. And those two planets will be forming a trine aspect to that sun. So that's really bringing a flow from the relationships. Your intimate relationships are really able to support you in exploring these depths of communication.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. And I mean, both the third house and the seventh house are social houses. You know, they're dealing with how you have relationships with the outside world. So that's really nice that I mean, this is like, you know, picture you walking down the street holding hands with your loved one, your honey, you know, and just kind of feeling that support as you're dealing with some you know, intense emotional issues that you're having to kind of work with, but feeling the support of that intimate partner. This also could be support you receive in a therapist's office or with an astrologer, that you're sitting in that one-on-one connection and you get this support. It helps really uplift you and helps you develop that sense of empathy and compassion for that annoying neighbor.
Yeah, you can receive a lot of compassion and just beautiful stuff from a partner or some other that will support you in your communication, or in managing that new neighbor.
Yeah, so that nice flowing aspect really comes the last part of the month. So it's kind of like it may feel sort of like a respite after having some intensities, and then you have this opportunity to kind of go, okay, whew, I made it through that. Yeah.
And then from there, we'll head into Sagittarius season, and it'll all be a different story.
That's right.
So now we're going to end this, and we are going to okay, so now we are moving on to those of you with Libra rising. And if you've got Libra rising, this puts the sun and Scorpio in your second house. That's where the focus is. That's where you're going to be really moving into deep emotional territory. So, second house, money, resources, self-worth, right, Jenny?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is, yeah. It's a lot about how you value yourself or your value system. And just that there's going to be, during the early part of Scorpio season, well, really the whole season, but especially in the beginning, there's this real requirement about turning inwards. And this is going to be, like you just said, resources, money, and values. This might be the place where you experience some of your most intense emotional struggles. And that's what you're going to be contending with during Scorpio season.
Yeah. So really take that contemplation of those issues very seriously at this time. And, so that's like the first third of this season is really just about going deep in that area. And then the second part is when we have the biggest struggle of Scorpio season. And that is, we are really contending with some real learning that has to be brought to bear on your self-worth and finances from the area of how you give of yourself, your creativity. There could be issues here involving your children, love affairs, creativity. Something in that area is pushing against this depth of personal understanding of your values.
Yeah, and having Saturn in your fifth house right now, and then having Aquarius as your fifth house sign, period, across all of your life. There's a suggestion here around maybe a desire to, when things get challenging, to just kind of get aloof and not really to be giving of yourself, and perhaps the way that really you deeply want on a deeper level. But does something about like, maybe when things get challenging, it's like, just, this is a little bit of a desire to perhaps check out. And with Saturn going through this fifth house, it's forcing you to really look at that and look at, are there places that you just won't allow yourself to give freely of love? And then what is that about? Because chances are it's about some way you value yourself. At least that's what Scorpio season might bring up for you.
Right.
That you really got to look at, well, how much do you love yourself? I mean, this is one of the hardest spiritual questions. And that second house kind of brings that in. And it's really deep with Scorpio there. So this is a difficult area for you. Right. And so Saturn presents some challenges, but it also can present a great deal of support. Like, how do you look at that? How can you stabilize that? And if you're working with creative projects, do it through that, like work with that.
Yeah, your creative projects can really teach you a lot at this time about how to value yourself, or how to work with your resources, your money. If you're really in a place where you're deeply struggling with money or resources or your self-worth, this is those are tough issues. And your creativity could play a really important role right now in teaching you that.
Yeah.
It may feel like a challenge. It may feel really difficult, but keep working in that area of your creativity.
Yeah, it's going to be an important piece during Scorpio
Yeah.
season. And
Yeah.
like, unfortunately, when we get to the last third of this season, the last chunk of it, the emphasis is more on this trine energy that happens, where you have Jupiter moving into Pisces and joining Neptune there. And then both of those things are going to be trining what's in Scorpio at that time, the Sun,
Right.
Mercury, and Venus.
Right.
So it really brings in this way that your practices, so this is your health routines, how you eat, how you exercise, are you getting enough sleep, those things are really going to support you in this
Yeah.
process of valuing yourself, of dealing with those intense emotional issues that might be coming up about self-worth.
Right.
And because it's Pisces in
Yeah.
your sixth house, you really have this tremendous capacity to develop empathy. You know, that can be something that's very helpful for you in supporting in through your daily practices. That's where you're going to cultivate that sense of empathy and let that help support you.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, I think, Jupiter backing into Pisces, it's like it's been on a little journey. It's gone up into the seventh house. You've been like, oh, I'm going to expand my relationships. But now it's like, wait a minute. First, before you get there, you've got to come back here and kind of develop some compassion toward yourself here too,
Mhm.
and really compassion toward the things that may be difficult for you in your day-to-day routines.
Mm.
And that compassion itself, rather than okay, I've got to fix my dietary issues, or I've got to get on this new regime of exercise. Well, maybe part of your day-to-day routine has to be just accepting exactly where you are.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, Jenny? That's kind of how I see that.
Oh, I
Is
think it's great. Yeah, I think that's absolutely it.
Yeah.
Because that whole self-compassion, self-acceptance thing, we kind of talk about it like it's like that, but in reality, it's very difficult to
Right.
do.
Right.
And is work that we're going to be doing through our lifetimes, all of us. But for those of you of Libra rising, it really brings those into the lens right now. Like just
Right.
Scorpio season is going to bring that up.
Yeah.
And really the thing is too with Scorpio in the second house, just as an individual, you have a lot of power and resources around how you like if you're able to value yourself, you have this tremendous well of power and resources to offer other people, and that's kind
Uh-huh.
of what this is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So develop some compassion toward yourself and allow yourself to really go deeply into those areas of your own understanding of your self-worth.
Nice.
That's what this is about. So enjoy the last third of this Scorpio season. Is really, really brings in some ease and pleasure there.
Mhm.
So now we're going to shift to those of you who have Scorpio rising. So if you've got Scorpio rising, Scorpio season is very, very, very personal to you, because this is going to bring these planets that are moving into Scorpio, the Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter as well during this time, into your first house. The first house is the most personal house. It is you, your personality, how you show up. So you have a lot of depth and a lot of power in your personality.
Mhm.
Go
Yeah.
deep, go deep
Yeah.
with who you are.
And part of your life direction really is about grappling with that intensity,
Yeah.
embracing it, and sort of recognizing it as part of who you are
Yeah.
and as part of your path. And you're here to share those transformative powers with other people. I mean, that's really what the statement is of having Scorpio in that most powerful house,
Yeah.
the first house.
Yeah.
And this whole Scorpio season, like the first third of it, really is dealing with very internal work. So it really couldn't get any more personal than it does for Scorpio rising people, like this, really needing to look at what is going on internally. How are you feeling? What's happening? And just getting clear about some of that, I think.
Yeah. So that first third of the month is really just that. It's about really going deep and looking at yourself and how you express yourself in the world. And then that second third brings in the difficult part of the season, where there is some challenge to that depth that you're trying to go to. There's some challenge, probably from your home, family, that area of the chart as we get to that square from Saturn to the sun. Or the
Yeah,
sun.
and we've been mentioning quite a bit that, Saturn really is the great teacher in astrology. It's the taskmaster, and it's blunt, and it demands that you discipline yourself. It demands that you take responsibility for yourself. And so what lessons can you learn from, it can be your home life. It could be your past with your parents. It could be right now what's happening with things you're uncovering about, let's say, your lineage, your ancestry. Those are all things that could provide some great teachings here. And this is something we all have to struggle with. And it's kind of a very private place in your chart here. Having Saturn in Aquarius is really a kind of breaking up that foundation a little bit. What's there.
And that square definitely brings in a very private struggle.
Yeah.
How you present your personality and how your lineage is teaching you, what you're learning. And yeah, it could be from your lineage. It could be from your roommate. It's, something in that home and family area is really pushing you to understand yourself and to take responsibility and face reality. That's the other thing with Saturn, is the facing reality of how your inner home life supports or doesn't support the power with which you're able to express yourself.
Yeah, that's right. That's well said. Yeah. And then the last third of the month, we're looking at a much more free flow of energy. We've got a trine from Jupiter, which is moving back into Pisces early on in the month, and then Neptune. So this is sort of like a flow of energy that's just coming towards you, that's helping you. And in your case, Scorpio rising, this is something to do with how you give love, or I just keep thinking about a creative project that you do because you love doing it. And the more that you can drop into that, it's just going to give you a break from these other lessons that you're learning, because you can't just bang away at the lessons. You've got to take the lesson in, and then you've got to give yourself time to take it in and let it nurture you and nourish you and let you grow. I mean, it doesn't all happen because you're pushing hard. Some of it happens because you take your foot back off the gas, and
and just allow that surrendering to the process. And, that's the beautiful thing about this Scorpio season, is it starts with okay, you got to go deep. And then it goes into, now you got to do the hard work. And then it's like, okay, just allow yourself to open and surrender to that process and allow the beauty in. The creative project or a relationship with children, something around creativity or giving of yourself that is really able to support that intense depth with which your personality is expressed in the world.
Yeah, that's great. And part of that, what the energy of Pisces is, this compassion energy. So it's bringing in this softness. Like, what is it? I mean, I was just thinking, like, when you see some children playing and you just can't help but smile because you see the game that they're playing, it's that kind of energy. It's bringing in that, like, oh, cool. Like, look at those, children just playing, and it like generates this instant sense of empathy and compassion, of like sweetness, and that's what we're after. I mean, that's a good description of like how you want to work with this intense Scorpio energy. It's just this other thing that comes in and really nourishes you. So
yeah. And compassion always, when I think about compassion, I just always think about how it turns itself to us and back to the other. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, we have to understand, we have to have compassion for ourselves in order to have compassion for others. And, when we feel compassion for others, if we're paying attention, we kind of can't help but turn it back on ourselves. And this, just this, the importance of how we're expressing ourselves, that powerful Scorpio really needs that compassionate sense to kind of open the door and allow it to really be useful.
Yeah. And I think also just connect it to the greater self. I mean, sometimes you're if you're deep in that Scorpio stuff, it can feel quite isolating. And at some point you need to kind of lift your head and go, oh, I'm part of a much larger process. I'm one being in the sea of beings. And I'm trusting right now that everybody's doing or is exactly where they are and need to be.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that for myself.
Yeah.
So
I think we both just said the same thing, only you articulated it in a way that made more sense to me than how I did.
it might be the other way around, but yes.
But yeah, that's really interesting how that plays out between those two areas of the chart. Okay. Anything else before we move on to Sagittarius?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so now we're going to go to those of you with Sagittarius rising. This is going to bring the Scorpio season. The energy of Scorpio itself is coming right into your 12th house, which is where Scorpio lives for you. With when you have Sagittarius rising, Scorpio is always there in that 12th house. So this is really about going into deep unconscious material.
Yeah, and I was thinking I have I can think of a good friend of mine who has this, and they have a very strong connection to the kind of shamanic wisdom where they have a shaman that they see, and it just helps provide this intangible depth of wisdom that it's hard to articulate. And the 12th house is hard to articulate because it's where we recognize or I guess I sort of reckon with is what I'm trying to say. Reckon with this sense of everything is larger than us, like whether that's your quote unquote higher self or the collective consciousness. But it's also where you kind of have a sense of something that's hidden enemies, or the way that you kind of oppose yourself without even realizing that you're doing with it. So there's a lot of hard to describe energies in this 12th house. And so fortunately for Sagittarius rising, this is what you're going to be grappling with during this month, is those kind of tucked away behind the scenes kind of energy.
Yeah. Very, very deep internal stuff is coming to light, and you're needing to grapple with it. So that's, the first third of the Scorpio season is really about that. It's about, we've been in a time of so much air, and now we're dropping into this deep emotional, for you, look behind the curtain, so to speak. And then the second third of this Scorpio season is going to bring us into the more challenging part of the season, when Saturn squares that sun. And we really have to look at what the struggle is. And there's a struggle here coming from the area of communication, of our day-to-day, not routines, but day-to-day thought processes, and the people in our life that are more superficial, but not necessarily so. But, the neighbors, the person at the grocery store, those kind of relationships. So there's some struggle in that day-to-day thinking that is pushing against our ability or willingness to go deep in our unconscious.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in a funny way, that third house, as you mentioned, is kind of this more, I guess it's more superficial in the sense that it's like the day-to-day quick interaction. But it's really interesting how, even though we might consider that a somewhat more shallow area of life, it's informing the deepest level. So I think there's something really interesting that although we may think of things as commonplace, that there's layers upon layers upon layers of meaning in life. And even in the most commonplace area has much to teach us about the deepest place. And there's a commentary on that here. And it's something about, not to mention the third house is how you learn. So, I mean, this very directly is confronting, how do you learn? How do you take in information? Are you able to listen, or are you not? And just kind of working with some of those things and thinking about that.
I love that. The way you said that just made me think of, this struggle may be very much about how you learn what is hidden behind the curtain there. How you really are teaching yourself to understand your own depth that's hidden in that 12th house.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I mean, part of the journey here is that just right off the top, just making peace with, like, you're never going to understand all of it. It's too deep.
Right.
It goes too far. We're just little, we're humans that are living one short lifetime. So you're never going to get all that. So part of it is just like working with what's available in front of you now. And how do you know what that is? Well, what's coming up for you emotionally? You work
Right.
with what's coming up for you now, and then you work with that, and then just allow for some of it to just lay there without you having to kind of poke at it, because you just aren't going to know. So right out of the gate, there's a whole thing around letting go and surrendering to a point without worrying too much about it, and just work with what's in front of you. And that's maybe one of the third house lessons. What's in front of you right now?
What's in front of you right now? I really love that.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. You know, another thing about the third house is siblings. So, you know, pay attention at this time if there are things coming up for you around your siblings that can be part of it as well. Because, you know, siblings are what's right in front of us right now when we're little kids. That's kind of holds that space. So then the last third of the month, the story whoops, I made that go the wrong direction. Jupiter backs up into Pisces again, where it's going to be joining with Neptune, and the two of them will be trining the sun and the other planets that are in Scorpio at that point in the month. So this brings us, you know, we start out the season going deep into this unconscious material, and then we have to grapple with it from this place of communication, siblings, whatever. And then at the end, we have this kind of respite that comes from the space of our home.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a free flow of energy that really helps us to kind of, the family, the home, the family allows us to see deeper into that hidden area.
Yeah, it's almost like the sense of compassion you cultivate at home amongst your family is what helps support that larger process. The softness you're able to bring to that family, that sense of forgiving, you know. And I mean, sometimes with Pisces in the fourth house, it can be that your family is full of poets, you know, artists, but also you could be
drunks.
Struggle. Right. I was going to say the other end of it is addiction or lack of consciousness, and to the extreme.
Yeah.
But I was finding it very interesting that Jupiter, you know, was, you know, in Aries, so it's all about the self and the creative projects of the self. And now you're being asked to be like, wait, hold on. You need to go back and kind of revisit this softer part of your personality, because the fourth house also refers to part of your personality, and revisit that area. And then later on, it'll go back into Aries, but you're going back to gather some undone things, or picking up some more tools to help you.
Yeah. Some more tools from the home, from the family, that will really support you in going into those deeper places. So yeah, the ending of the season, the Scorpio season, has really kind of uplifted us. That's great. That's awesome. Anything else before we move on?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Sagittarius.
So then we are going to move on to those of you who have Capricorn rising. And this brings the sun in Scorpio. And of course, Mercury and Mercury and Venus will be in there as well. So this brings, you know, really the start of the season, this first third of the season. We really have to go into the deep places of what community means to us, what we're learning from community.
I mean, with those of you with Capricorn rising, that you have a lot of emotional feelings about your community, like a lot of maybe your forward thinking with Capricorn rising, you're here to move some things. You're here to move, you know, things forwards. You're here to see some progress. So for you, you've got a lot of intensity around that community space and the social space. So that's really how you're showing up in the world, is like bringing that to that. And it's not the easiest placement. So you want to be paying attention to, like, what kinds of emotional struggles are you having during the Scorpio season? What's coming to light And emotions are, I mean, a lot of ways they're signposts for letting us know like where our attention needs to go.
Mhm.
So with the Scorpio season, this is where your attention is going, up into
Right.
the social space.
Yeah, and when we
Mhm.
talk about that social space, that community, it can be so many different things.
Mhm.
It is not going to be your closest friends. It's more, like-minded people that support you to what your desires are.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a group at work. It can be places that you volunteer. I mean, it
Yeah,
can be a bunch of different things, but
yeah,
in the simplest way, it's groups, right?
yeah, yeah,
Groups.
yeah. Community that supports you. That's
Yeah.
how I think of it. So then the second third of the Scorpio season brings in the biggest challenge. So the challenge to going deep in the community space is going to be coming from the second house, resources, money, self-worth.
Mhm.
So there's something in that area that is challenging your ability to go deep in community.
Yeah, and with Saturn going to the second house, you're receiving a lot of lessons about self-worth, about money.
Yeah.
Money, I always think of as just one of the more superficial layers of the deep sense of value you have to yourself. Money can be extremely triggering, right? But it's partly because of I mean, it's partly because of the social constraints and structures around it, but it's also because it's tied into how we feel about ourselves. Like if we're given the social stamp of approval, like we've been successful financially, we feel one way. And if we haven't, we feel another way.
Yeah.
And so this is how those things are kind of coming to bear now, like how you feel about yourself. There's a lot of lessons in there about your self-worth.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. That connection between finances and self-worth is so interesting. If your
yeah.
bank account has ever been on zero, you know what that does to your self-esteem, your
Mhm.
self-worth. So there's something in that area of whether you have or have not, you
Mhm.
are learning a lot about how that impacts your self-worth. And there's a struggle there between that and the area of community, or the ability even to be supported by community.
Yeah. So
Maybe
this
you're struggling and your bank account's on zero and you just don't feel worthy of being supported by community.
yeah.
There's a lot of different ways that could play out, but think about how that aligns with you if you've got Capricorn rising.
Yeah. So I mean, with Saturn there, it's like there's a taking responsibility for yourself. Your self-worth is what's happening here. And,
Yeah.
and can be, depending on your chart configurations, that can be extremely difficult, like if it's right on your moon or something like that. But no matter what, those are the lessons that are being kind of delivered to your doorstep at this moment.
Right. Okay, so that's the challenging part of the season.
Mhm.
And then once we get past that into basically the last third of Scorpio season, Jupiter pushes backwards,
Mhm.
retrograde, back into Pisces where Neptune is. And the two of them are going to be forming a trine aspect to the Sun and Mercury and Venus, which will be there as well. So this provides a lot of relief, a lot of like a free flow of, oh, okay, I can open up. I've done some of this work here, and now I can open up and accept the support and the intense, deep support from community.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Jupiter having been in Aries and then moving back to Pisces. And so switching from your fourth house, where you're having to stand your ground with Jupiter and Aries and stand up for yourself and do these different sort of courageous, fierce activities. And now all of a sudden it's going back into Pisces, where it's saying, hey, wait a minute, you know what? You can go back and you can learn some more things. You can go back to school. You can pick up some more understanding of how you want to be soft and kind and compassionate to yourself and spread that out to your neighbors. And as you navigate your immediate environment, you kind of get to bring that softness back in and let it support whatever this emotional content is around groups.
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've got some poetry to perform in front of your community. Wouldn't that be sweet? So yeah, I think that does that wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say one other thing. I mean, with Capricorn rising, you may very well be very able to have a lot of compassion for people in your day-to-day environment, the cashier, the person delivering your mail, those, you may find yourself in touch with those more kind of transcendent things in this very mundane part of life. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's
Or your siblings as well. Siblings can also be a third house thing. So there could also be something going on with siblings that really helps to support your ability to receive from community as well. So there's many ways these things can play out. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you who have Aquarius rising. So this is going to bring the attention of Scorpio season to your 10th house. So you are at the beginning of Scorpio season. You're going to drop into this deep emotional space of where you show up in the world, your career, your reputation in the world. That's a very intense place for those of you with Aquarius rising. And that's a place where you're going to be really grappling with deep things at this time.
Yeah, it is interesting having Scorpio up there in the 10th house. I mean, it just kind of implies like, that, as you said, your workplace or your profession might bring up a lot of intense feelings. But the question is, how do you work with that? Because it also can make you very powerful in your profession.
Absolutely.
Of being a beacon of how do you deal with your difficult emotional content. And because it's so public having Scorpio in the 10th house. But so the first part of the Scorpio season is largely about reflecting inwardly about that, noticing where your emotions are, noticing where you're being triggered, and developing a little bit more of a sense of relationship to self.
Yeah.
So
okay, so then from there, once you've gone deep and you're looking at your deep, intense emotions around career and how you bring that empowerment into your career, you're going to face some serious conflicts here the second half of this season that really come from your personality. That's an interesting thing to think about. You know, as Saturn has been moving through your first house for the past couple of years, Saturn's been moving through there, and you're really learning about how your personality affects other people, how people respond to your personality. And yet, how does that personality come into conflict in some way with the empowerment of the career?
yeah,
That's a deep contemplation.
it is, and some of it's like Aquarius is, is an air sign. So Aquarius is very much in the cerebral realm, and looking at this sort of mentally innovative and inventive ways of showing up. Like you probably show up as a fairly unusual person in a lot of ways, with that Aquarius there. But Saturn going through that first house is you've really been working with this on an intense level where you've been really having an impact on your self-image, like how other people may perceive you, and then also your life direction around being this creative thinker. I mean, that's but then all of a sudden you show up in your profession as this deeply emotional person. There's a conflict there, and so and that's what this Scorpio season is highlighting, because you always have that conflict to some degree, but that's just really highlighting it, and there's amazing lessons to be learned here for you. This is a period of great growth.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, people get nervous about Saturn, and yet Saturn's job is to teach us, to give us the structure to learn something. So, really learning how to use that innovative thinking personality in the space of deep emotional expression out in the world. It's it's a little bit of a challenging connection there, but that's what you're working with. Really great. Okay, go ahead.
But so we come to the last third of the month. It's really kind of broken down neatly into thirds this season. So in the last part of Scorpio season, Jupiter will have already moved back into Pisces, and both Jupiter and Neptune will be trining the Scorpio stuff. So the Sun, Mercury, and Venus. So it really kind of gives you this free flow of energy. So this is like a gift as I know you like to talk about trines as a gift. So this is the gift of support, of this sense of just easy energy that comes your way. And in this case, it's something about how you value yourself, like your self-worth, or it might be how that you have a financial shift that really uplifts your ability to do what you want to do in your career. It could be another thing that would happen in this time with Jupiter moving in the second house.
Yeah, some way that you're experiencing your resources, your money, your self-worth, some way that you are experiencing that, that that allows you to show that depth in the world. You can't show it's interesting to think about showing that emotional depth in the world. You've got to have an expansive self-worth to do that, especially if you've got that Aquarius rising that wants to just kind of be cool and intellectual. So in order to show up as this deeply powerful emotional force out in the world, this is really helpful to have that expansive self-worth, that expansive and soft self-worth, emotional compassion for the self.
Yeah. I mean, there's a real transcendent feature in there too. Like if
Yeah.
you can transcend the kind of the mundane, or the, just really look at sort of like lifting yourself up. But I would think that having the Aquarius rising, it's interesting just because, like you said, you present as this intellectual, but there's actually this really intense emotional content that is very much tied to your work, because the second house and the 10th house are both tied to profession, livelihood, how you generate money, how you attract material wealth. All of those things are very much tied in with those two pieces. So that's where you're getting this nice free flow of energy. So
it's an interesting, the Scorpio season is so interesting, just how it's broken down. It's like you go deep, you do a lot of work, and then you get the gift.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, so we are now going to go on to those of you who have Pisces rising. So if you've got Pisces rising, Scorpio season is going to bring the sun and Mercury and Venus as well into your 9th house. So this is where you've got to go deep. You've got to really open your eyes and go very deep into your understanding of your worldview.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting with this whole setup here, because the Scorpio is like, it's such emotional intensity that, first of all, this is a place where you may feel triggered, as you see other people's kind of worldviews, or as you grapple with your own, there's like this kind of undergirding of emotional content. And if you're not really aware of it, I would think that it would make you susceptible to manipulation in this area of life from other people. But the degree to which you can become aware of, oh, wow, I'm a really emotional person when it comes to my worldview, and really work with that, I think that that would really liberate you. That gives you the opportunity to take your power in that way and kind of liberate you from other people's manipulation. Because that 9th house is also religion and some of these bigger ideas. And I think that it's really important. Part of what we're seeing in Scorpio season is it's a great time to take a look at what are those emotions that drive you, and also to know that you're never going to know 100% of them. We're just talking about what's in front of you now. Where are you being triggered now? Where do you feel frustrated? And then taking a look at that and just developing a better relationship in that way.
I really like that you brought up the ability to be manipulated. And the ability to manipulate as well. I mean, that's going to go both ways, right? So your worldview, it is very, very important. And it's funny, this is the last one. We're on Pisces, and this hasn't even come up. But I think wherever Scorpio is in a person's chart, it is so important that we look at the issue of integrity, because we can be manipulated, or we can manipulate.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of it's about self-awareness.
Yes.
Though, like you can be manipulated. Like I was just thinking about somebody joining a cult. It's like you can be manipulated because you're not aware of your own emotional threads, and somebody starts pulling on those threads and they pull you in a certain direction. But if you're aware of, those threads and where they lead to, then you can say, no, you know what? No, thanks. I got this. And like tug that thread back. I mean, it's kind of like that. It's and again, knowing that it's, you're not going to know everything, but if you can work with the feelings that are coming up now, because they show up in your body, really. But anyway, so the first third of the month really gives you this opportunity to kind of dig into some of that material beneath your own opinions and your worldview, and ask yourself, how critical is my thinking? Is it, am I thinking for myself?
Yeah. Am I thinking for myself in those big picture ideas, worldview, religion, education, all of that is ninth house material, travel as well. There's a lot of intensity for somebody with Pisces rising, education, religion, not spirituality, religion, ninth house, and travel really bring up a lot of that kind of intensity. So you've dropped down into that in the first third of this season. The next one, we've got some really difficult material to learn from.
Exacerbate what we talked about.
Exactly. So with Saturn in the 12th house, you've spent the last couple of years, as Saturn's been working through that 12th, of really trying to grapple with and understand a lot of stuff that's behind the curtain in your own unconscious.
Yeah. And it's interesting with Saturn, I think, going through the 12th, because Saturn is structure, and meanwhile it's in this 12th house. It's kind of hard to grasp. It's hard to understand. It's behind the scenes. It's hidden. It refers to collective issues. It refers to suffering. And sometimes with that, there might be a desire to kind of cling to that Saturn, too tightly, and it's really like, how do you allow it to give you just enough structure so that you can create this opening to expand your worldview, but at the same time not sort of try to give you an easy answer, the world is like this, so I'm just going to believe that, and I've checked the box. It's so much more deep and profound than that. And having Saturn in the 12th house is really asking you to look at those much more ethereal issues, or esoteric issues.
Yeah, and to grapple with them intellectually in Aquarius. It's like it's a intellectual grappling with a lot of hidden material.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, so then the last third of the month changes everything. We kind of come out from under that. Jupiter backs into Pisces, where it has been, and then it got into Aries, and now it's going back, kind of joining with Neptune. And while they are kind of playing around together, they form a trine aspect to the sun in Scorpio and Mercury and Venus. So this kind of gives us a free flow of compassion as we're grappling with our own worldview.
Yeah, and I think, with Pisces rising, and so the ascendant and the first house there, one of the things it talks about is kind of your life direction. So it's sort of like your part of your purpose, we'll say, if you think in those terms. So as Pisces rising, part of your purpose is to deal with these issues that are hard to just put in a neat little box, but to develop compassion for the suffering of others, to see the potential for all of us living together on this one planet, like this kind of lofty idea, but you see how that kind of works in practice, and you see the potential for all of us to be participating members of that collective. And that's part of what you're doing here. So with Jupiter going back into Pisces there, you're getting another opportunity to work with that aspect of yourself.
Yeah. It's a real expansion of your compassion towards self and toward others. That needs to be revisited. And in that revisiting, it's really supporting your ability to open to a deeper understanding of your worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes hand in hand. It's like that sense of self and part of your purpose, and then what are you doing? Okay, I got to expand my worldview and deal with the intention emotional issues about how I feel about my worldview and my opinions, and then working with those together. There's a pretty nice flow of energy there. So.
So it's a very interesting, Scorpio season is very interesting this year, just with the kind of back and forth thing it does. We got to go deep, and then we got to do the work, and then we're given the gift.
Yeah. So
There we have
all
it.
right.
All right. I think we are complete at this point. And if anyone is still watching us, probably a few of you with Pisces rising might still be listening to us. Thank you all. It's been great to make these videos. We're having fun doing them. And thank you for watching.
Right, thank you.
And thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, Laurie.